Okay, guys, I'm going to get started. See, I have to let somebody else in here. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to get started. For the first couple of minutes, I imagine I'll be interrupted a few times trying to get people in. If everybody could mute themselves, that would be great. Okay, amazing. First of all, it's really, really awesome and amazing to see all of you. The current students, alumni, it's amazing that you take out time from your busy schedules on a Sunday to come and learn a little Torah to prepare ourselves. And today's shir is dedicated to Refuah Shlema for Tzvi Aryeh ben Nechazissel, a very dear human being who, as all human beings, need our tefillos. And when you listen to today's shir was a general shir, but it's very nogeya. This particular introduction to the shir of the shir being l'refuah shlema, the schus for the speedy recovery for Tzvi Aryeh ben Nechazissel. And you should take it in that way and apply it in many, many ways. And you'll see what I mean as we go through the shir. Okay. So let's, please, everyone, remember, please, to mute yourselves. And I'll probably, again, send that reminder. I'll probably send that reminder throughout this year. Okay, beautiful. Shabbos Hagadol was yesterday. And there are many reasons that Chazal tell us why it's called Shabbos Hagadol. One of the reasons because there were tremendous miracles that happened when the Jewish people were told to take the god of the Egyptians and to sanctify the god of the Egyptians, to get it ready, tie it to their bedpost so that they could make a carbon, make a sacrifice out of it. And nothing happened to them, and they were willing to do it. After all these years of slavery and being enslaved by the Egyptians, they found the strength to follow God, and that was an amazing event. Now, it didn't happen on Shabbos, but nevertheless, it became associated with the Shabbos before Pesach, and we celebrate and commemorate that incredible miracle. There are many, many reasons that our rabbis bring as to why the Shabbos is designated as Shabbos Hagadol. But there's another reason. And amongst the reasons, our rabbis tell us that all the hashpaos, all the influences, and all of the brachos, and all of the ha'oros, all of the lights of Pesach begin on Shabbos Hagadol. We give you an example. I want you to take a dot and make a dot in the middle of a piece of paper. And in that dot, that dot is Brias HaOlam, its creation. I want you to look very carefully at that dot, and you'll see actually 12 spokes that come out of that dot. Those 12 spokes are the 12 months. And every single one of those months has an energy. Every single one of those months has a hashpah. Every single one of those months has an influence. It has a personality. And then I want you to go and put your pen back in the center of that dot, and then start to draw a spiral. And go round and around and around and around and around, 5,700 or however many spirals that you need to bring us to today. And that's Jewish time. Jewish time isn't linear. We're not commemorating and remembering things that happened way long ago. We are actually reliving in that wedge of time. We are reliving the events that happened. And that means that in 1948, in Jewish years, when Avram Avinu celebrated Pesach, he was celebrating freedom. And then in the year 2448, when we were taken out of Mitzrayim and we celebrated Pesach, we were celebrating the Pesach of Mitzrayim, but we were celebrating freedom. And 3,500 years later, when we're now just further on in the spiral, but we're in that same wedge of time, all of that freedom and all of those brachos and all of those hashpos and all of those energies that were available to us then are actually available to us now also. And that every single one of them we can grab onto during this period of time. There is an incredible Ramah. The Ramah says that v'nogu shaloi lahakiz dam b'shum erev yontif. That we shouldn't give blood, we shouldn't let blood on any erev yontif. Ve'ein l'shanos, and if we have a choice, we shouldn't change from that minig. We shouldn't voluntarily give blood on erev yontif. Says the Magen Avram, why on erev yontif? Because the Isa, Sof Perach Yud Ches, the Shabbos, because there is at the end of the 18th chapter of Maseches Shabbos, that on erev Shavuos there was a zika, there was a terrible, there was a bad influence, a bad spirit. The Shmei Tavoach, whose name was Tavoach. V'ilav de Kabilu Yisrael Oraisan, if it wasn't for the fact that the Jewish people accepted the Torah, Havi Tovach Luhu Lebisrayu, Uvidamayu, it would have destroyed the blood and the flesh of the Jewish people. It would have wreaked havoc on the Jewish nation. And therefore, Gozu Rabbanan, our rabbis were Goza, they decreed on every Erev Yontif, because of Erev Shavuos, that we shouldn't give blood. Even though the real problem is only on Erev Shavuos, but to make sure we wouldn't transgress that, to give blood on Erev Shavuos, because that was dangerous, because there is this bad Zika running around. So therefore, to make sure that that wouldn't happen, our rabbi said on every Erev Yontif, you shouldn't do it. Says the Machatzis HaShekel, who is one of the explainers, one of the commentaries on the Magen Avram, and he says, V'noided the b'chol hazmanim. He says, look, this is a principle of Judaism because it's in all the times, in every single auspicious day, in every single incredible day, she'ira la'avosenu, that happened to our fathers, in yon mas, some idea, some issue, kishiyagia zmanahu, when that time comes, shuv misoyrer ktsas me'ein oso davar, that thing reawakens and it's available, it's there in the air, it's the energy is there. That's that wedge concept. That all of that which was available then is available now, positive and negative. But that means that all of those brachos, all of those kochos, all of those powers, all of those capabilities that the Jewish people received and were able to tap into in the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim are available to us now also. 3,500 years later. And it's just for us to go and to grab them. So what's that special
For
event?
Ari Lauren.
And all of that begins. And all of that begins on Shabbos Hagadol. That from Shabbos Hagadol on, all of that which is available, all of that is available for us for the taking. But what are those special kochos that are sitting in the air, that are there in this wedge of time, that are available for us to grab onto? So the truth is there's many of them. And I could focus on many, many different things. But I want to focus on one thing. Because if you look carefully at the Ramban, in Shmos, Perek Beis, Pasuk Chaf Hei, the Ramban says that the truth is, we weren't ready to be redeemed. You see, there's this discrepancy between whether we were supposed to be there for 400 years or whether we were supposed to be in Egypt for 430. At the end, we weren't there for either one of them. We were there for only 210. But there is two psukim. One pasuk says 400 years, one pasuk says 430 years. And we have to wonder which one was it? Was it 400, 430? The Ramban spends a lot of time on this. And the Ramban says, amongst many of his answers, he says, look, the 400 is from the birth of Yitzchak, 430 is from the Bris Bein HaBesarim, all fine and good. But then at the end of this, the Ramban says something so magnificent. The Ramban tells us that, look, I'll explain to you my favorite answer, he says, the one that I appreciate the most. That Umini Yadua, everybody knows that the Jewish people in Mitzrayim were roim v'chatoim yod. We look at the Jewish people, we say that they were like victims. Paro hated them and God went after them, and he did. But at the end of the day, we were chatoim v'roim ma'ud, says the Ramban. We had done bad things. We were mevatel bris milah. We got involved in idolatry. We got involved in lashon hara. We had sunk so low. And really, the decree was for 400 years. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu looked at it and said, I've got to give them some extra time to clean them up. You see, they've got issues. And those issues are legitimate. Those issues came to them because of their history. Because Avraham Avinu had a buck authority. Because Yitzchak and Yaakov had a buck authority. That gene became affected in us, that ability to accept authority. We needed the cleansing of Mitzrayim to clean that up in us. We couldn't get along with each other. From the very beginning, Avraham with his brother, Yitzchak with his brother, Yaakov with his brother, Yosef with his brothers. It infected us. It affected us. And we needed to go through a Mitzrayim to clean that up. But while we were there, we sunk to a place that we shouldn't have sunk to. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I need to add on years. And I need to add on 30 years. But then, Vanitzak el Hashem Elokei Avosenu, we cried out to God, Vayishma Hashem es kolenu, and God heard our voice, Vayaris anyenu, when he saw our suffering, V'yasam aleinu, and all of the trials and tribulations, V'yasaratzenu, and our pressure, we were not worthy to be redeemed. But he accepted our cries and na'akosam and our groans and our pain because of the tzara Hagadol she'oyu. And that it was because we cried out to him and because we davened to him. That's why we ended up leaving early. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu stopped. It was supposed to be 400. Then it was supposed to be 430. And then it was 210. Because v'nitzak, because we cried. No matter how low we fell, as long as the tsaras came, we turned to Hashem in tefillah, then Shomei HaKadosh Baruch Hu tza'akosenu, God hears our cries. And this was the reason that we were zocheh, that we merited to leave the Golus Mitzrayim. And this koyach hatfilah, this power of prayer, is available to us every single Pesach. And it begins yesterday on Shabbos Hagadol, and it's there in the air for the picking. Today, tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday, and throughout Pesach. We have the opportunity to be mechazek, that koach, hatfilah, that power of tefillah. And it's available to us as a klal, as a Jewish nation, and it's available to us as individuals. But if Golus Mitzrayim ended with a cry out to Hashem, then why did that take 210 years? Why didn't that happen earlier? Why didn't it happen quicker? So let's go back to the beginning of creation. God creates the world. And in the beginning of the second chapter of Bereshis, we're told that before there was anything in this world, when God created man, the Torah tells us, Vayitzer Hashem Elokim es ha'adam, offer min adam, he created us dirt from the ground. Vayipach ba'apav, and he blew into his nostril nishmas chaim, a breath of life. Vayihi adam lenefesh chaya, a person was a nefesh chaya. We were a living being. The Targum, the Aramaic translation says that v'novach bi'afoi, that he breathed into our nostrils nishmaso dechayi, a breath of life. And the Targum adds, v'haves ba'adam l'ruach memalula, we had the ability to speak. The breath of life, living, is the ability to be able to communicate and the ability to be able to speak. And that sets us apart from every other organism in the world. And the Medrash adds 2 words to that. And the Medrash says, Kadam Malka. It says, before the king. What does it mean to speak before the king? To speak before the king is tefillah. And that's the very essence of man. The Torah tells me in chapter 2, before anything was in the earth, and before any grass grew, because it hadn't rained yet, and there was no man in the world, to work the earth. And Rashi says, why didn't it rain yet? Because man wasn't there to work the earth. And he wasn't able to recognize, there was nobody there to recognize in the necessity of the rains. And when man came, and he realized that you needed rain for this earth, he davened for them, and they came down, and immediately all the vegetation that God had created, that was sitting at the very precipice, at the very edge of the earth, waiting to burst through, it burst through. The trees and the grasses all started to grow because Adam Harishon davened for them. Because that is man's mission. Man's mission is to use that koach hadibur, that power of speech, to bring out the potential of this world into the actual. To take the 22 letters of creation and to create conduits, enabling man to be able to access the bracha that was in store for him. And this mission was challenged in Golus Mitzrayim. Rashi in Parshas Vayechi asks the question why there were no breaks in the Parsha of Vayechi, the Parsha where they went down to Mitzrayim. Lama Parsha Zu Stuma, why is this Parsha closed? Lefisha Kivin Shenifter Yaakov Avinu, because as soon as Yaakov Avinu died, Nistimu Eineim V'Livam Shel Yisrael, the eyes and the hearts of the Jewish people were closed off. Mitzaras Hashibud, because of the pain of the suffering. Sheyischilu L'Shabdom, that they were going under. The servitude that they were suffering under. Now we understand why their eyes were closed, because they couldn't see. They were suffering so badly. But what does it mean their hearts were closed? Because what is the heart? The heart is also an organ that is Oved Hashem, that serves God. How does the heart serve God? What is Avodah Shebelev? Our rabbis tell us that's tefillah. Prayer. Tefillah, sincere tefillah. That's Avodah Shebelev. And why was that unavailable to us in Mitzrayim? Because Paro, who saw himself as the ultimate king, was insanely jealous of tefillah, because it placed the Jewish people before a different king. And that made Paro crazy. And Paro waged a war against the Jewish people, waged war against their ability to pray, wanted to create a situation for them that they became so despondent that they would feel that it was impossible for them to pray. There was nobody listening. He tried to trip up Moshe Rabbeinu with the frogs and tell him, when Moshe asked him, when do you want the frogs to go? And he said, tomorrow. What do you mean tomorrow? Why not say today? The frogs were like, kill him, Mitzrayim. You know, it's a great thing to do at your Seder. You want to get your kids really involved? You want to feel what was frogs like? Ask them to describe what they think it would be like to have millions of frogs all over their life, and to have to open up the fridge and to have frogs jumping out at them, to chomp into a piece of bread and to bite into a frog, to go to the bathroom and to have to contend not with brothers and sisters in the bathroom, but with frogs. Let them describe it and then recognize the nace, the miracle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did, the awesomeness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When you put them inside of this, it's amazing. Well, Paro was inside of it, and he didn't want them to leave now. He wanted them to leave tomorrow. We didn't care about his people. He didn't care about anything. Yeah, they'll go tomorrow. Because tomorrow, that was when Moshe was going to pray for them to go. And he figured, you know what? They're going to leave today. So when Moshe gets to pray for them tomorrow, they'll be gone already. And people will realize that there is no efficacy. There is nothing helpful about prayer. This was Paro's mandate, his whole purpose. was to trip up the Jewish people, was to take away from them that koach hadibor, that ability to be able to speak and to pray. That's why the snake, the siman, the sign for the Jewish people and the sign for Paro was a snake. Because God was sending a message. He was sending a message to Paro with that snake. Why the snake? You know, if when they threw down the stick, it turned into a can of Coke, that would have been an awesome thing. Like everybody would have said, whoa, there's something crazy going on here, right? You would have thrown it down and it would have turned into a orangutan. Wow, everybody's going, whoa, this is something else. Why the snake? Because the snake was a reminder of the Nachash HaKadmoni, of the original snake. You know, when God punished the snake, he said to the snake, you now have to slither around, and you have to, everything you want in front of you, everything you want to eat is right there, mamish, right there. And you don't have to worry. It's all sitting right in front of you. It's in the dirt. It's in the ground. That's a punishment. Ladies and gentlemen, I can only tell you from here in Israel, but I imagine in any town in America, in any Jewish store, if you've been there in the past 3 days, if anybody said to you, look, I promise you, you don't have to wait online ever again. You don't have to contend with all the shopping carts and the enraged people that are shopping and pushing you over and trying to grab the last things off the shelf. What a bracha. What kind of curse was this to the snake? To tell the snake that he never had to shop again in his life, he never had to stand online again in his life? Haidul Hashem ki tov. That's the greatest thing could ever happen. No, because what God was doing to the snake was he was cutting him off. Because the snake didn't have to daven anymore. The snake didn't have to ask God for a thing. Because everything he needed was sitting right in front of him. And therefore he was cut off. He was menutak. He was cut off from God. And Moshe was sending a message to Paro. By cutting yourself and cutting the Jews off. By taking away their koach hatfilah. By you cutting yourself off from God. Just wait to see what's going to happen to you. Because this is an einish, this is a curse like it was for the snake. And that's why we languished in Golus. Because our koach hatfilah, because our power of prayer was impaired. It was in Golus. And Paro needed to ensure that our tefillas didn't happen. And he won. Eventually we were miyayish. Eventually we gave up hope. We thought, you know what? It doesn't help. And we couldn't find our voices. And when Paro says to Moshe, show me a sign, to nu lanu meifes, he says, show us a sign, not show me a sign. Because he knew the Jewish people needed a sign as much as he did, because the Jewish people had also lost their faith and their hope in their tefillas ever being answered. This is who we are at our roots. We are a people who pray. Take the word Adam. And there is a way of using words in the Torah with what's called the mispar male. By taking the letters of a word and filling out the letters. I'll show you what that is in a second. And then we can understand what the essence of the word is. If you take the Adam, Aleph, Dalid, Mem, Aleph, so you have a Lamed and a Pei. Dalid is Lamed and a Tuf. And Mem is Mem, Mem. Lamed, Pei, Lamed, Tuf, Mem, Mispalel, to pray. Because that is what our mispar mole, that's what our very essence is. Moshe Rabbeinu grabs the tail of the snake and turns it back into a stick, sending a message to Klal Yisrael that if you were able to grab even the tail end of tefillah, even a krechts or a sigh or a moan or a scream, that alone would be enough. And that's why the first plague to Paro was dam. Because Adam has two parts. He has dam, flesh, blood, tidamu and nefesh. He has the physical side of himself. And he has the aleph, he has the neshama. And when you take away the aleph, all you're left with is dam. And when Paro took away the aleph, the koach hatfilah, the ability to be able to join together through prayer and through words, the physical and the spiritual, to be able to elevate that towards God. And when Paro took out the Aleph, what was he left with? He was left with Dam. And that's the message that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was sending to him. That if you take away that koach of the Jewish people, then all you're going to be left with is Dam, and your very water, your very life force is just going to be something physical with nothing. It's nothing. It's just Dam. There were 10 makos. Amazingly, there are 10 words in the Torah that are used for prayer. And what Paro was trying to take away, our 10 koiches hatfilah, our 10 powers of prayer, Kadosh Baruch Hu turns to him and says, look what happens. And he brings him the 10 makos. That when you mess around with that koach hadibur, you mess around with that koach hatfilah, look at what you're left with. You're left with destruction and suffering. That's the reason why when we daven, we have to be so much geula l'tfilah. We have to take the redemption, Baruch Atah Hashem Goal Yisrael, and put it right next to tefillah. Because we have to recognize that what brings geula, tefillah brings geula. Our prayers bring redemption. We're suffering, we're down, things are happening to us and to our world. We need to be mispalo. We need to use our koach hadibur, our power of prayer. And that's what happened to us in the Geula, in the Gullus, until we found our voice. And when we found our voice, so then V'nitzak, we cried out to God. And Vayishma, God heard us. And he brought us his salvation. So what happened? That suddenly we found our voice. So in the Hagadol, we say in the Hagadol, we quote a pasuk. It's a pasuk in the Torah. And the pasuk says, Vayi bayomim arabi mahim, and it was in those days, Vayomas melech Mitzrayim, the king of Egypt died, Vayonchu b'nei Yisrael min ha'avoda vayizaku, that we suffered, we groaned from the avoda, vayizaku, we cried out to Hashem. And if you look carefully at the pasuk, it seems that the reason that we cried out to Hashem is because the king of Egypt died. Vayomas melech Mitzrayim. Why did the death of the king of Egypt elicit this kind of tefillah? Why did it affect our tefillah? The wicked witch is dead. It's great. Paro died. Why would that intensify our tefillahs and our cries and our screams? So Rabbi of Volozhiner says so beautiful that he says in the early years of the Shibud, in the early years of the suffering in Mitzrayim, we had good reason to suffer because the king hated us. And the king was a Rasha. And they were convinced that all the bad things were happening to them, all the suffering was happening because of this wicked person. And therefore they waited for him to die. Because when he died, the misery would end. And he died. And it didn't get any better. And the misery didn't end. And they realized that the pain wasn't being caused by man, but that the pain was coming from God. And they turned to God and prayed. And they cried, Tata, have Rachmanis. And those tefillahs made it upwards. And that's why this Chag is called Pesach. Not Chag HaMatzos, but we call it Pesach. Because Pesach, the mouth, speaks. We found our voice. We found our tefillahs. And that's why the Geula happened. And that koyach, to find our voice, to be able to pray, to be able to ask, to beseech, that ability to recognize that me as an individual, I'm suffering so much, and my world. Rabbi said, just look at the world we live in, an insane asylum. and the inmates are running the show. We look at where Jews are holding. And we have to find our voices. Because when we cry out to Ribbon Shalom, then amazing things happen. The Melech Biderman says an amazing thing. He brings down from the Svarim that at the Pesach Seder, when you hit these words in the Seder, V'nitzak el Hashem Elokei Avosinu, he says, what should you do right there at that moment in the Seder, right at that place? V'nitzak. Because that koach is available to us. It happened in Mitzrayim. It brought about the Geula. It brought about the redemption. The purpose of remembering the Exodus of Egypt is not merely to remember an event that happened. The purpose of remembering the Exodus of Egypt is not merely to tell over a story. The purpose is to relive that experience and to recognize that if a Geula happened to them 3,500 years ago, a Geula can happen today to me. And how did that Geula happen? That Geula happened because V'nitzak, they cried out. So V'nitzak, cry out. Cry out to the Ribbon Shalom. We know that when we daven for other people, our tefillas are answered first. When we daven for the world, when we daven for the Gola, for the Geula, when we daven for Klal Yisrael, then every pain and every kvetch that we have in our hearts will be answered also. So he tells them an unbelievable Maisa. That he says that there were Jews in Europe that used to get land from the pirates, from the noblemen, the Polish noblemen, and they would use the land and would try to raise money. They would plant things. They would whatever. They would try to raise money, and the pirates would ask for exorbitant amounts of money and would threaten them that if they didn't pay up, so then they would lose their land. They would be thrown in jail. There was a certain Yid that couldn't pay his payment to the pirates. And the pirates gave him an ultimatum. He said, 2 weeks, or I'm going to throw your whole family in prison. And the guy was petrified. And he went to the Abderov, he went to the Oyev Yisrael. He went to his Rebbe and he wanted to see him so you could talk to him, down for him, do something for him, give him some eitzah, maybe give him some money even. When he gets to the Abderov, when he gets to the Oyev Yisrael, he won't see him. He's not seeing anybody. The guy's like so depressed. He can't believe it. I'm here. What am I going to do? It was already close to Shabbos. He said, look, no, I can't go back for Shabbos. I'll stay. Shabbos Hagadol. And the Oyev Yisrael gave a drasha. And the guy didn't understand much of what the Oyev Yisrael was talking about. But then the Rav started to speak about the Haggadah. And the Oyev Yisrael said, V'nitzak. And he described the power of a heartfelt cry at that point in the Seder. And said the Oyev Yisrael that a Yid can use these moments to ask for anything. Says the Oyev Yisrael, even body, even chai, even mezoni, even for children, even for life, even for parnasa. And then says the Oyev Yisrael to the crowd, and even if the pirates threatens to throw a Yid in the dungeon for his unpaid debts, a Yid can cry out to the Ribbon Shalom for help. And when he says V'nitzak, and he will be saved. And the guy's like blown away. What just happened? And he got his answer from the Oyev Yisrael. He understood. He didn't need to see him now. It was done. It's all good. All good. It's under control. Comes home to his wife. His wife said, no, what happened? He said, don't worry. It's all under control. They get to the Seder. The guy's like excited, like a child going on a vacation. He is so excited he can't contain himself. And they get to the word V'nitzak and he bursts out crying. And he and his wife daven to the Ribbon Shalom. And then he finishes, continues the Seder. A little bit in the back of his mind, he's wondering what just happened. I cried. I don't feel any different. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. There was an unfamiliar peasant that was standing there. And he spoke in a rush because he was so nervous. And he says to him, listen, I just killed my wife and I'm escaping. And here are 2 bags of money. One of them is mine. One of them I'm giving to you to watch my money. I'm paying you to watch my money. I'm coming back for my money. But if I don't come back, you can have this money also. And the guy turns around and runs away. the guy's like dumbfounded. What's going on? After Yontif goes to the pirates, he pays his debt. Guy never came back. He went back to the Oiv Yisrael, to his Rebbe. And the Rav received him. And the Rav thanked him. And he thanked the Rav. And he told him, you're amazing, Rav. You're amazing. You're a Baal Meifus. You're like a magician. And the Apter Rav looked at him and said, no, it's not my Meifus that did it. But it was the power of your Vanitzak. It was the power of your crying out. He tells a Maisa of a couple that before COVID learned this idea that when you get to Vanitzak, you have to cry out to the Ribbon Shalom. They hadn't had children yet. They'd been married for many years. And they cried out to the Ribbon Shalom every year on Vanitzak. But when you're sitting at somebody else's Seder, when you're sitting there with your parents and you're sitting there with your uncles and you're sitting there with friends, how much can you cry? How much can you daven? And then COVID hit. And they were alone for Pesach Seder. And when they got to Vinitzak, Shifchi komayim libeich. Their hearts opened up and they cried rivers of tears. And a year later, there was Zeicha to a child. Because we think that the reason that there's no Geula is because there's no Moshe Rabbeinu, is because there's no Manhig, is because there's no leader. The reason why there's no Geula is because there's no Vinitzak. Because there's no one to call out. And if we would call out and cry out to Ribbon Shalom, everything would change. The whole point of the Seder, of recounting the events of the Exodus, is to understand why that Geula took place, so that we could make it the paradigm that we follow for our own Geula, both personal and national. And it's so simple. It's all because of Vinitzak. It's all because of turning to Ribbon Shalom. And not Vinitzak while we're doing 10 other things. Not Vinitzak when we're thinking about work and we're thinking about all other things. You know, the kavanas that so many of us have during davening is how can I make it to the bakery, to the dry cleaner, and the supermarket and get back home in time for whatever I need to do. The kavanas during davening, our ability to become our prayer. Va'ani tfilasi. To turn our Pesach, our Seder, into a tefillah. That every single thing that we do, not just say, but that we do, is trying to grab on to this understanding that I'm calling out to Hashem and saying, I want to be connected to you. I want the Geula. I want to be Nigal. I want to be redeemed. I want to be elevated. I want to be uplifted. When I eat my matzah, when I drink my wine, when I make my kiddush, Every moment of the Seder becomes a tefillah, becomes a prayer. That God, send me a gula, bring me closer. I want to come home. And then Vinitzak, we cry out to him. And we know that when Vinitzak, when we cry out to him, Vayishma, God hears us kolenu. He hears not our words, not our actions, but he hears our voice. The voice that comes through our actions. The voice that comes through our words. The voice that comes through everything we do. We can turn our lives around on Pesach. We can leave our own Mitzrayim. Because that's what's available to us in that wedge of time. That's the koyach that's sitting out there. That from yesterday until the end of Pesach is just floating right in front of us. There for the taking. And when Vanitzak, when we call out, may it be Hashem's will, that when we call out, we are Zaycha to Vayishma. We are Zaycha to him hearing us and him bringing us open. Vayotzienu Hashem Elokeinu, that God should take us out from our own Mitzrayim and allow us to see an incredible geula, an incredible redemption in our lives. Physically, spiritually, emotionally. And that we should fulfill our mission in this earth to call out and to connect to the Ribbon Shleilim, to the Master of the Universe. I wish everyone an incredible Pesach, an incredible experience this Seder nights, talking to Americans, and that we should be Zaycha, to cry out and to be Zaycha, to be uplifted, and to see our tefillas answered, to see our tefillas as individuals answered, and to see the tefillas of Klal Yisrael being answered. And may this Pesach be the Pesach that is the harbinger of Melech HaMashiach that should come quickly and speedily in our days with the Geula Shlema. Amen.
Amen.
The only problem of giving a shir on
Amen.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. The only problem of giving a shir on
Amen.
Zoom is that I can't see faces. Oh, here I got a couple. Baruch Hashem. Yeah. Rabbi,
Wow.
so good to see you. Refuah Shlema. And a beautiful, uplifting Pesach.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for the amazing shir and really beautiful message.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody for coming.
Thank you. Shkoyach, Rabbi. Shkoyach.
Awesome.
Wow, that was...
Chag Sameach.
All right. If anybody wants, it's hard to talk in this. Let me take out the view here, but you can private message me. You can email me, rjfromlj@aol.com. You can hit me on WhatsApp. For those of you who don't have my WhatsApp, it's an American number, 619-913-2696. You can WhatsApp me. You can message me. I'd love to hear from everybody.
And
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rav Wohlgelernter, I want you to know that there's a very special schus that I was able to be listening to your shir as my treatments began.
Amazing.
So,
Hey.
thank you.
It should all be a bracha.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Okay,
Chag
guys.
Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Good Yontiv, Rabbi.
A Chag Kosher Sameach to everybody. Have an
You're up.
uplifting Yontif. Damn, I didn't get my picture today.
I forgot to send it to
Oh,
you.
yeah, I forgot. No, I'm waiting.
I sent it to Rav Dovi.
Good. You're not sharing with me. Send it to me.
I will.
I have a collection of your pictures in tefillin.
I will.
Okay, take care.
All right. Have a good Yontif, Rabbi.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.